Good evening. Thank you all so much for being here and for being patient with us as we work through some technical difficulties. My name is Suzi Q Smith, and I work with The Word, a storytelling sanctuary. I'm our conference director, and it's my honor tonight to welcome you all to this event, to this author talk. The Word is a nonprofit organization working to build a publishing community that will fight for inclusivity. And it's our privilege and honor to co-host tonight's author talk between Ana Castillo and Lupita Aquino with our friend and partner, Duende District. And here to tell us a bit more about Duende District is Angela Maria Spring. Hi, Angela.
Hello, thank you so much, Suzi. So good evening, everybody, and a huge thank you to our wonderful friends at The Word. We are so grateful to have the opportunity to partner with them these past 2 years for a phenomenal virtual event series, amongst other things that we do. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. Thank you for your patience. Again, I'm Angela Maria Spring. I am the owner of Duende District, a collaborative pop-up bookstore by and for people of color where all are welcome. And we have current locations in Washington, D.C. and Albuquerque, New Mexico. And the cornerstone of the Duende Project is about the collective, the community, and creation and decolonization of literary spaces by and for people of color. So we are very excited to welcome you all this evening for what might be our most important event yet. We are incredibly honored to welcome legendary Chicana poet, writer, and activist Ana Castillo, author of the poetry collection My Book of the Dead. And she'll be in conversation with Lupita Aquino of Bookstagram's Lupita Reads. So we are doing a Q&A at the end of the program. Feel free to put any questions you have in the chat when you get the chance. And we do hope that you purchase this wonderful book as well as others with Duende District to help keep us going. Seriously, even the smallest purchase helps so much. And also a really wonderful thing is that if you do buy My Book of the Dead with us, Ana is doing signed book plates. And so we'll get those sent off to you. So I'm going to sort of break from my normal thing that I do. And before I properly introduce our speakers, I do want to share a story about the very beginning seeds of Duende District. So long ago, and not in a galaxy far, far away, but when I was 17 in 1999, I went to college very far away from my beautiful desert home of New Mexico, because like most teens leaving home for the first time, I was trying to find myself somewhere else. And my father is from West Virginia, and my mother, who, as many of you know, came to the United States from Panama as a child, also moved there after they married, and they both got their advanced degrees at West Virginia University. And my siblings and I were all born at the hospital where my father did his residency in Tacoma Park, Maryland. And as you can imagine, being brown in West Virginia was fairly oppressive in the 1980s. So my mother convinced my father to move when I was 3, and we ended up in New Mexico. And so that year in 1990, after I graduated high school, instead of going to school in Chicago, where I had a spot at another school, I decided to go to Morgantown. And it was a very lonely, alienating, extremely difficult time for all of the reasons you can imagine. And I went to visit an aunt that November, who took me to a bookstore where I browsed the fiction stacks as I normally did, and came upon a novel about a family of women, and that it was set in New Mexico. So I was like, oh my God, I must have this. I bought it. I took it back with me. And I think I read it that in like 2 days, which is a feat for, I feel like, a teenager. It not only connected me back to the place that I really thought that I needed to leave, it also told the story of strong women like my own mother and the women in my Panamanian and Puerto Rican family. And it showed me for the first time ever, and I am such a book nerd. I have been reading since I could possibly read, but that I could actually find my true self in a book. And it changed my life forevermore. And that book was So Far From God by Ana Castillo. I found out Castillo was also a poet like me, and she was dedicated to justice and change and reclaiming our ancestral spaces in this world. This is Castillo's power. She is a brilliant revolutionary light. Her work and legacy helped birth the seed of Duende in my deepest, most secret heart, so I could bring it to life in the very place where I needed her the most so many years ago. And then it also brought me to my dear friend, Lupita Aquino. And I think Lupita and I talked about the possibility of this event happening for years, and now here we are, and I marvel at how life is a powerful spiral and how these connections always bring us back to each other. So thank you for listening to that, and I would love to introduce our speakers. So Ana Castillo is a celebrated author of poetry, fiction, nonfiction, and drama. Among her award-winning books are So Far From God, a novel, Black Dove, Mama, Mijo, and Me, The Guardians, a novel, Peel My Love Like an Onion, a novel, Sapagonia, and The Massacre of the Dreamers, essays on Chica born and raised in Chicago, Castillo resides in southern New Mexico. And Lupita Aquino, better known as Lupita Reads, the co-founder and moderator for Lit on H Street Book Club, hosted at Solid State Books, and is a passionate reader active in both the local and online book community through her Instagram blog at lupita.reads. She's also a columnist for the Washington Independent Review of Books and a contributor for the Reading Women podcast. So I'm really excited to kick this event off and hand it over to Ana so she could read some poetry for us.
Unfortunately, we have lost her.
Oh,
yeah,
no.
we just have some technical issues again. So, but I just wanted to, I just wanted to say thank you so much for that wonderful introduction and for telling us a little bit about how you connected to Ana's work and how meaningful and impactful it is to the mission of Duende, which, I think that's the beauty of books, right? That's the beauty and the power of books. And my Ana origin story so very well, because it's just, I got it when I didn't know I needed it. And so when I had it in my hands and I read it for the first time, it just really cemented feelings in me that I knew were there. I just didn't have the language for. And again, that was so far from God. So, I love that we have been able to build our friendship and our connection over shared books and do this, host amazing events, because we have had events together. And I think that we have Ana to thank for that. And hopefully she is able to join us again. If not, I'm okay with this being just a show about Ana and how amazing her work's been. And,
the Ana tribute.
Yeah.
The really nice thing is that our community, I think, is New Mexico does not have very good internet, y'all. We were talking about this and that. I have the super, super good stuff, but I think in certain parts of the state, it's hard to hold the bigger connections. And I know that Ana doesn't do many virtual events, so it was an honor for her to do this with us. And I'm sad that we're having these difficulties, but I'm not sad that I am here with my wonderful friend and that we're having this wonderful conversation about somebody who is so meaningful to us in so many ways.
Yeah, and again, I'm just I sat there and had a full circle moment where I'm we're really doing this. We've talked about it. We fangirled over all her work, and it's amazing to be here. And technical difficulties or not, I think that we're here.
We're here. That's right. And Suzi's here doing the thing and directing us. Let's see. Oh, I like this. She's got some great questions. If there was a celebration of Ana's work, what would be on the menu? How would you ask the guests to dress? Oh,
I love that.
I love that.
That's a great question. Oh my God.
I'm thinking because so you think about so Ana's history is, she's really, when you think about her, you should think about her in the same breath as the revolutionary poets of the 70s, and especially I think about her with June Jordan. I think about her with Sonia Sanchez. Obviously it was a much more Chicana oriented kind of thing, but her poetry is so raw and so political. And so I'm thinking of what would we be dressed as Chicana revolutionaries of the past? What would we be wearing?
I don't know if I would personally go towards the past more so than again, just connecting full circle and friendship. And, I have a friend who's tuning in, Ophelia, who is a writer, and I'm sure you know of her too. She's an amazing writer, and she gave me a shirt that says Chingona. So I think I would wear that just because, again, just having found community through books and words and language. and community that is like us, you know, Latinas, chingonas. Like, I think that's what I would wear.
Weirdly, I have a chingona pen. I could wear my chingona pen. Like, I think we got that at the I got it our partnership at the National Museum of Women in the Arts. Do you remember the night that we had?
I do.
We went to go. That was such a great night. We were there for
Giovanni.
Yeah, like another legendary poet who like and Elizabeth Acevedo, who's a good friend. And then Adriana, who runs the gift shop there, she had the pens, the Chicona pens, which were really cool. So I wear that. I think I'd wear I put on my butterfly earrings because she has a really wonderful poem in my Book of the Dead that is about, I think I bookmarked it. It's
yeah, that was actually another question. Like, what's your favorite poem? And I'll show it here.
Yeah. So it is the poem is Amazonia está quemando, and it's about the butterfly. She's got so many beautiful ancestral, like indigenous ancestors. Oh, she's back. Okay. You guys should get this book and read this poem. I'm not going to read it because she might read it, but I think it was also featured on the Poem a Day, possibly. Oh, audio is still poor, but she's here.
Hi, can you hear me okay? How's your audio?
I finally can hear you.
Oh, you can? God. Yay! Whatever you did, fix it.
Well, we restarted the modem for one because it said that I wasn't on the internet all of a sudden, although it seemed like it was on, but we're here now. Yay.
Yay! Oh my God, what an honor. So you missed I'm just going to recap. You missed the fact that Duende District, that you are embedded in their origin stories, all your work, everything you've done, just at me too, as a reader, everything that I feel like I stand for as a reader is because of you and your work. So it's such an honor to be here with you.
Thank you. It's my honor too to be here with everyone today.
And so we did want to kick off and have you read from your collection, your newest collection.
I will be very happy to. It's these are new poems in the sense that most of them are not published elsewhere, and I've written them over the last few years, especially the last 4 or 5 years. It takes me a long time to get a collection of poems together, so to me, new might be like 10 years ago, but I'd like to share a very opening poem, the lead poem in the book. It's called A Storm Upon Us. And I'll mention that it's written in memory of John Trudell, which I think people in northern New Mexico are familiar with him. He was an activist. He was with the American Indian movements, and he was also a performer and musician and the poet. And so this was written in memory of him when he crossed over. But so this was in 2015, but I think it was a premonition in a way. A storm upon us. A storm is coming. It is on the horizon. It has traveled far, fast, wide, and taken much in tow. The storm, infused with lies and nitrogen. Water, air, ground infused, our fruit and animals infused, our minds infused with lies and nitrogen. We're dumbstruck, believe ourselves smart when we are instead confused. The tricksters counted on our being caught unawares. They knew our selfishness, greed, most of all, fears. The storm approaches. Can you hear it? 999 hoof-like vibrations beat against our eardrums, and we remain indifferent. We have our things gathered. Our children seem fine. We always rebound. The storm comes and goes, returns. Next time harder. We don't even bother with shelters. We give it new names each time. Further fire and rain we mourn. We start again. It could have been you or me, we say, dying. in public beneath a baton's blows falling and the spray of a sniper's bullets, but it wasn't. We go on. Disaster has happened to someone else. We venture out and buy more. We take more. We discard. We pillage the earth. The storm takes sinister forms, goes by isms, neo and post hyphenations. Be afraid, leaders of the faceless enemy warn. Beware, be aware. When you travel, we cannot protect you. We will be vigilant of your whereabouts. Our watchful eye will know your life. Long lines to survive, much less thrive, lie before you. You'll feel shame like in naked dreams, but worse because we in fact are watching you. We will make sure you don't question. And when the storm is upon you, when it has destroyed your homes, and your children are not fine, and your dreams of golden roses and bright days are nowhere but in the pages of a storybook, we will be content in our heavens, eating peeled grapes, sipping fine wines from our vineyards of abundance, sitting on our thrones, new gods. We'll smile down upon you, our creation of ruin, pick our teeth with your bones. So that was in 2015 and is the first poem in this new collection, my Book of the Dead.
Well, thank you so much for reading that. What a treat to be able to, as a reader, you read the poems and you experience them in your own kind of voice, right? And so to have that paired with the author reading it, it's very special. So thank you.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to ask you, I've seen in an interview before that, you mentioned with the previous administration, you had kind of given up on wanting to write. And so I'm really curious about, the time length of these poems and what finally made you want to say, okay, it's time.
I think it's important to mention to people, because I know that I don't know what planet you would have been on, but not on Earth, if you weren't affected by so much that's been going on. 2020, for one, 1,000 people a day were dying in this country and around the world, and natural catastrophes due to climate change and so on affect people everywhere. We've just had Louisiana, it's constant, it's still going on. If not that, if you're also aware of the administration in this country, at least, but certainly we're not alone in the disparity of attention to people, but also white racism reared its ugly head in a way it hadn't for decades. It's always there. We're not going to say that we don't experience it. We're all aware of it. But it was blatant in the last few years. And so I think it's important to mention that if somehow you survive some of all of that, that you're still affected mentally, psychologically by it. Yeah. And I had a personal family crisis last year, and so I had my own drama and at home. So with all of that in mind, yes, it was very difficult to think about going back to my writing. But I actually, by 2017, was clinically depressed, and I felt after decades of being an activist as a writer, an activist in most of the things, the choices I make in my life and the things that I think are important and to prioritize. I felt that with the last administration that I was affected by it so personally, and I wanted to give up. And, so the first thing that I gave up was feeling that my voice wasn't important. So I stopped writing and I started to draw. There's a few of the drawings in the book, which I was happy to include. They were my meditation. They kept me calm. They kept me steady, more or less. But I had decided I was not going to write anymore. on New Year's Eve of 2018, I made a decision, a resolution at home that I'd come too far to turn back now. So I decided to work on the poems, one poem at a time. And most of the poems that are most of the poems in there were there in my files. I did add some, I took out some others, but I decided I could do a poem at a time. Now I'm happy to say that I do have a lot of conviction when I set my mind to something, and so the book is here. I pushed for it. I organized it. I edited it. I put it in the 3 sections. I'm the one that edited and organized its format and so on. And I got encouraged by having the book accepted so quickly and out it so soon. And now I am working on, so my next step, just like when you go to school, the next step now is to write stories. So I am very close to finishing a book of short stories. And I think, so I'm moving very fast with it. So I think we'll be seeing that maybe in another year or 2 years, depending on where it gets placed. But all that is to say is that I'm happy to address the sense of isolation, the sense of defeat that I went through, because I think we all have had to go through it at some point. It's important to acknowledge it and to and to share how we pull through it. And so I'm happy to answer questions about that, because I did pull through it, and a lot of it had to do with making decisions to do that. But I don't want us to lose our hope collectively or individually. And I'm concerned about young people that were home. I have a granddaughter who's 13, and she was home all this time, and so she sees no friends and has no. She just went back to school this past week. So young people have had to experienced it. A lot of older people that were working out of home, and so it's very important for us to talk about ways to feel a community and feel a collective concern. And I felt very. I didn't feel the isolation that some people felt, although I'm feeling it now. But I wasn't feeling that so much as just defeated. That we work so hard and we try and we give so much of ourselves in so many different ways. It's an enormous amount of people out there that I'm so grateful to, that whom I don't even know personally. Black Lives Matter, the people that went out on the streets in 2020, risking their lives, their health, because they believe in something bigger than themselves. And I felt that way for decades. And so that depression came from feeling that we're in the belly of the beast, and I realized that it had come home. And so I'm happy with the new poems being out there, and I hope, even though they're not always cheerful, it sort of hints at that with being called my Book of the Dead, that we understand that there's a community and I hope that when people read it, they read it out loud. They read it to their families or whoever's in their pod or their bubble or in their classroom. And if you go out and see some friends, and poetry is meant to be read aloud, and I hope that they do share that and know that they're not alone.
Yeah. And, absolutely everything you said. I think a lot of us were struggling with the ways in which we could, come to terms with what was going on and what happened. And a lot of us still haven't. And I just see your book, I read it, and I just feel like it's a time capsule of so much of what we need, to explore in our feelings. And it's just, it came at such a right time, I think. So thank you for persisting and for continuing to write.
Thank you. Can I answer a question that I'm seeing here?
Yes, of course.
Yes. What are some small things that motivate you to be creative? So as I mentioned, when I went verbally silent, I went back to my first love, which was visual arts. But all I could do was was use a Sharpie. The painting behind me, by the way, is a painting I did a few years ago. It's sort of mixed media, oil and acrylics. And I haven't had the I don't know if you, I don't want to use the word inspiration, but I haven't had the motivation to go large or to do color. So I was just sitting in my bed, just, you know, with a Sharpie, doing these line drawings as a meditation. So the question is, what are the small things that motivate you? And the end product was creativity, but I allow myself to use something that's methodical or repetitive. That's easy. Easy as so to do something like this painting, that would have been like a lot. I would have to be like you know, I don't have to be in the happiest mood, but I have to feel like, okay, I'm going to do a painting. I'm going to go get the materials. I'm going to get this together and look for the space. Whereas with this was just a notebook that someone had given me. It was a gift that I had on the shelf. And so to small things is going to the bookshelf, taking out a journal, finding a pen that you like, using it however you want to use it. And that's the truth. I just sort of learned by just with least amount of effort and least amount of pressure. And I started, some of the drawings were originally amorphous type of creatures, and they were coming out of my head. So the other small thing is don't inhibit yourself, don't judge yourself, just and it comes to us in so many different ways. Some people do patchwork quilts, other people like to do, you know, cooking projects. Whatever is easiest for you is the way to start. Then you can go to bigger and bigger and go back to color and
going
YouTube channel.
Yeah. Start your Bookstagram, you know, that stuff like that, right? Going back to your just the illustrations in the book, I was curious if they in any way kind of speak to like the sections of the poems and the way you edit it, the collection.
You know, I have a vivid memory. I was in New York at the time, and so I had a little apartment and not much space. And I was really old school about it. I printed out all these poems. Some of them made the final cut, some of them didn't. But I did, as I've always done in my life, is in this case, I spread them on the bed. I didn't have even much floor space. And to see how they might, where poems went together. And so that's what I remember doing for a couple of days. And I came up with these 3 sections because it was like, I have these poems. Now, how do I make sense of them? And so I remember doing that. And I've been asked that a couple of times. And that's all I can tell you, because I don't really remember specifics. Like, well, I just knew this poem was going to be the lead poem, or I knew this poem had to go at the end. Because I mess around with things quite a bit. But I remember that I had to look at all of them physically. So I had hard copies. And then I started thinking, well, this one might go here. And maybe this one follows here. I've also worked as an editor. And so I have a little bit of that as far as practice in terms of organizing. So that might have been, you know, a skill that I had and I wasn't aware of and I didn't appreciate at the moment. But that's what I did in moving forward. It was a big mess. Initially, it was just like a folder. And then I thought, I've got to do something with it because this doesn't look good. It's not a good look for me. So I really, I've taken the really small steps, and I'm sharing them because I want to encourage people that do feel stuck.
Yeah, and it was an interesting and really enlightening choice to make the title poem the end poem. And I was wondering if you could speak about the end poem and, you know, the referencing to the Mayan predictions of 2012 and the influences of that.
The end poem is actually the title poem of the book, My Book of the Dead. As I said, when I read the poem A Storm Upon Us, it was 2015, and it does feel like a premonition. And I always admired John Trudell, and I do think that there's some premonition to things that he said inspired me to write that poem. That's not the earliest poem in the book. There's a couple of poems that were from 2012. That was the year that I decided I would start working on a new collection of poems, figuring it would take me about 10 years. And so here we are. And my Book of the Dead, it's a long poem, and I don't want to say that it's mythological. There's some maybe fantasy there, metaphors. I rely on some of our ancestors. By ancestors, I mean Mexican and further south, Mayan beliefs. It's a subject that's always been close to me. It was the first course that I ever taught when I first got out of college, was the beliefs of pre-Columbian, pre-Hispanic peoples. So there's a lot of references. It's not limited to us, and it's a journey. And I guess, I don't really want to interpret the poem, but it's a journey about leaving this world and going into the underworld, and all the horrible things. It's a metaphor, and it's also referencing to what our ancestors believed, that we went through these various hells, and eventually there's a rebirth, and we come back. And so I come back because there's a reason to come back, and we come back because our loved ones are waiting for us, and there's work that's not finished for us that we must resume. And so that's the final poem in the book.
And I also wanted to mention that, and it's not a spoiling the book, but you definitely have some poems in Spanish, originally written in Spanish. And the way that you are able to translate them, but also include them kind of unapologetically, is something that has always been very inspiring to me about your work. To just for you to be able to write without having to explain, you just write as you are. And so I want to just know about, the decision to keep doing that and to do that in this collection.
When I decided to be a poet as a young adult a long time ago, it did come from my grassroots political activism. It seemed like a good, immediate way to communicate. And I come from the generation before we had bilingual education. I come from the generation that fought for bilingual education, but I didn't have the privilege of having bilingual education. Mm-hmm. I learned to write in Spanish at home with my mother, who taught me when I was around 10 years old, so that I could write to my grandmother, my great-grandmother in Mexico. And so I did know how to write in Spanish, but my daily language with other Latinos in this country, many of us knew Spanish from home, or we're first-generation Mexican or Latino, Puerto Rican in Chicago, but we were not formally taught to write in Spanish. But mm-hmm. Our daily language is English and Spanish. And so that's always been, it's a political decision, but it's also a practical decision. And that was that we may not have the privilege of studying Spanish formally in school, but we do know it. And so I've always used Spanish. In my novel, So Far From God, which is based in northern New Mexico, near Albuquerque, as you know, mm-hmm. uses Spanish that I learned there because it's been used in that area for a couple of 100 years, longer, 500 years. And so W.W. Norton, that published that book, respected that it was not a foreign language, but the language that people speak, and they did not italicize it. That was my argument for that. So I do enjoy writing in Spanish, but I don't publish in Spanish because I was born in the United States. I am a U.S. Latina, a Chicana, and the language that we use is English and Spanish. Now, I included some poems that I wrote in Spanish in this book, but I also, before submitting it for consideration for publication, because the book is in English, I did put the word out and ask people who might want to assist in translating. I'm a translator and I could have translated it, but I don't like translating my own poetry. But I did end up putting my spoon in there anyway. So the poems were written originally in Spanish, and then with a little help from my friends, people that responded, some whom I haven't had the pleasure yet of meeting in person. I hope to one day. We're very happy to say, well, I can do it, but then, I also felt that it was important for me to as a translator, to be as precise as possible. So the English is also there.
Yeah, and I think that it just was. It just kind of reminded me of why I continue to love your work and gravitate towards your work, which is something special. And just a reminder for everybody listening to, if you have any questions for Ana, please put them in the comments and we will put them up and we'll ask them. I have plenty of questions that I still want to keep asking you. So I'm not going to, but I'm conscious of everybody's time and I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to ask a question. I'm glad you mentioned that with W.W. Norton, your publisher for So Far From God, that, they didn't push back on you, being you and just writing Spanglish and English and the language that is of New Mexico in that time that you documented. And so I was just curious, what has publishing been like for you, publishing then to now?
Well, you have to keep in mind that even though the world discovered me with So Far From God, I had actually been writing for 20 years at that time. And that was my third published novel. And I had also enjoyed a reputation by then as a poet. I had published several books of poetry and done some other work. Like at that time, I was also doing some editing and so on. So this is the book first came out in the late 90s. And that was a big moment for U.S. Latinas in this, where else would we be in this country, that were being read by all kinds of people and translated in all kinds of languages and so on. This is a country that still is dominated by the English language and by the belief that literature, like the culture here, should be from England rather than like in the Southwest, that also has a long history. So that sort of faded away, and other flavors of the month came up and so on. And then there's also been a plethora of U.S. Latinos, Latinx, now Chicanx, writers that are, and presses and small presses. So there's just been a lot that's been going on since that time. I started out very modestly, self-publishing a little chapbook in Chicago. And so I've really run the gamut of experience. And in recent years, I've published my most recent books with smaller presses and university presses. But, I don't let any of it. The hardest part was when I was publishing with larger presses, was being steered to write something that I don't want to write. And so it's more important for me to write what I need to write, what I want to write, what comes to me, and finding then the right home for it. And sometimes the right home is a indie press, and sometimes it's a university press. But I was criticized, not a lot, but by a few, for example, with So Far From God, and people thinking that somehow or other, W.W. Norton came along and convinced me to write a book of, stereotype characters, and that I somehow thought it was going to be bought by all kinds of people. And that wasn't the case at all. I started writing the story at, in Albuquerque and put it in a drawer, and think about sending it out anywhere, and so on and so forth. And I was encouraged to make it into a longer work, and that's what I did. So the Norton or publishers weren't even in the picture when I was working on the book initially. So you never know. I was accused the same thing with my novel, The Guardians, which is at the U.S. border, which is close to where I live now. I'm still in New Mexico, but I'm a little further south where it's sunnier and warmer. And rest assured, I will always write what I want to write at the moment that I want to write it. And then I find the home that's willing to take it and wants to publish it and be supportive of it. In this case, it was the University of New Mexico Press. I'm grateful to their support. I wanted it out right away. They put it out right away, and they have it out in a beautiful hardcover collection with some of my drawings in it. And, so some people believe that, that I write what I want to write, and other people think that somehow or other I'm making money hand over fist and I'm writing for white people. And that's not the case for me. And that's never been the case for me. And I don't know how I would do that. Like, I don't know how I would sit down and say, I'm going to write this poem or this story for a white audience. The majority of my audience has always been Chicanas, Latinas, and then Latinos, and then girls from there. And I welcome any reader, anyone who wants to read my work to it. But I don't write for anyone. I write for myself.
Yeah, and I often wonder if that's just the plight of the fact that there's not enough actual Latinx authors being published or given the chance to be published. That's the part is we put all this weight on one writer to represent a community, right? When there should be multiple voices. So, and I'm sorry if you can't hear me.
You were a little choppy. I don't think you had a question though.
No, I didn't.
That was
a
little
just
choppy for me. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
I'm hearing you kind of choppy, but I think you said something about the Latin.
Let's move on to this.
Yeah, someone is asking me a question. Daisy Magallanes says, I once had an MFA director tell me that my work was not marketable. What advice would you say to young writers who are trying to give voice to their truth, but met with these critiques? Yes, I think it addresses what I was just saying about writing for myself. I would like to say what I've said many, many times. I've never taken a writing workshop. I wasn't an English lit major. I wasn't a Spanish lit major. As I mentioned earlier, my motivation was to now you would call it speaking my truth. At that time, I saw myself as an activist, and I needed to find a way to communicate that with absolutely no expectations of being published or read by mainstream or crossing over. That's never been my objective. I'd like to say to Daisy is I have my first novel is called The Miskiwala Letters, and it has maybe 35 years. It's been in publication. It's with Doubleday, nonstop in print. I hear even now that people are using it in their classes in Mexico and the United States. And I always like to tell people that when I wrote that, and I wrote about 2 or 3 versions of it, but when I wrote it, had I ever had the idea that it would get published and that it would go as far as it's gone and as long as it's gone, I think I probably would have given it an easier title. The one thing that everybody always asks about is how to pronounce Miskiwala and what does Miskiwala mean. So when I wrote that novel, I really thought I would just leave it between the mattress and the bed spring somewhere in my apartment in my home, and nobody would ever see it. And I did get it out there, and it was eventually picked up by Doubleday. And it's, as I said, has been nonstop in print. It's part of their compendium. So I would take that, Daisy. I would take that, and I would. You couldn't go back and tell your director about that, but you could have that as an example of what is marketable and what is not marketable. Who's to say? Who's to say? But you can't do anything else but write what you have to write.
So it looks like you have another question. Hola, Ana. How would you describe your writing process on writing your memoir? Uh-oh.
Someone asked me, how would you describe your writing process on writing your memoir, Black Dove, compared to your writing collection of poetry, My Book of the Dead? That's Elizabeth Vergara that asked that. I taught from 2009 to 2019. I taught in this country and in other countries my own form of a memoir writing workshop to the public. And I taught it in, like I said, all over this country. It was open to anybody, usually over 18 years old. And I felt it was very important for people, certain communities. I gave workshops in Argentina, in Kazakhstan. People have their stories to tell for their community's sake. It's very difficult to write your story sometimes because you're afraid of who's going to read it, who's going to debate your memory of something, and so on and so forth. So I'd say that the difference is that with memoir and personal essay, it has to do with really having the courage to tell that story. And it's your story. It's not anybody else's story. And so Black Dove was really walking my talk. All the things, all the tricks that I had in my bag for people that came to my workshops, I had to pull them out for this book. And I do invite your readers to read it. It's called Black Dove, Mama, Mijo, and Me. And I told some of the most difficult things that I had to say. And I want to say that it was very liberating, and it was my voice, the voice you're hearing right now, the language that I use right now when I speak in English. And writing poetry is very different because in poetry you can always say, well, I wanted to write about this, but it's really not me. It's not autobiographical. And I did do some persona poems in which it really isn't about me. So it's a very different process, and you can really hide behind metaphor and the brevity of poetry. Whereas in memoir, if you're not going to be honest, don't even bother. I don't. Janie Martinez says she's asking about the memoir class, and as I mentioned, I stopped doing it in 2019. If a university or an organization would like to contact me that wants to sponsor a memoir writing class, whether it's online or in a personal visit, they should contact me at my email, and I'll consider it. But especially with the pandemic, this is that slowed me down, and I decided not to do it anymore. And I'm not that interested in doing it virtually. I will do it if someone has the group and they want to put a group together and organize that for me. But I am not that I'm not that keen on it. I like the personal aspect, the private aspect of doing memoir writing. If someone out there is associated with the university or with an institution of some sort and would like to contact me, I'll consider it. But for now, I'm not doing any on my own.
How are we coming in now? Am I still coming in choppy for you?
I can hear you right now. It's a little choppy, but I can make out what you said. Do you hear me?
Yes, I can. We can hear you just well. So I typed in this question. Feel free to
That's
answer.
the important thing.
So would you say your previous poetry collections are in conversation with your newest collection? And I'm thinking about I Asked the Impossible and My Father Was a Tolteca.
You know, I write in almost all genres. As I mentioned earlier, I'm now in the throes of close to finishing a collection of short stories, and some are flash fiction, and some are very long short stories that probably want to be novels, and I'm not letting them at this point. So what I'd like to say about that is that all my work is related, fiction, nonfiction, and the poetry. Here's the thing: I started out believing this was one of the forms of community organizing and grassroots organizing that I was doing, was working in the arts and getting the work of brown people, and then later, as I got more into becoming aware of the differences for women and became a feminist and so forth, it's been very important to me to uh, find audiences in different genres about things that concern me. And for example, in the late 90s and early 2000s, when we began to hear about the killings of women along the US border, I couldn't find enough genres, enough ways to talk about it. So I wrote like a long piece in a novel in verse called Watercolor Women, Opaque Men. But then I also wrote about it for magazines and journalism. And so it was like, did I mention this yet? Wherever I went, I would have to talk about the things that I felt were urgent. I feel it's very urgent for us to be aware of climate change and environmental racism. And I've talked about that in Massacre of the Dreamers, but I've also written poems about it. And I'll also write stories that will bring that in. So all my books are in conversation with each other. And once you read one or two of my books, whatever it is, you can rest assured you're going to see those things come up in other books.
Thank you so much. So I think we have time for maybe 2 or 3 more questions. So if you are in the audience and you still haven't asked your question, please feel free to pop it in the comments. I did personally have one last question, and I hopefully will have our tech team throw it up in case, Ana, you aren't able to hear it. So I'll ask it and they'll throw it up. What would you like a reader to take from this collection? If you could just have them take one thing.
There's also a question now, so I'll answer your question. And what I don't know what, I never know what people are going to experience reading my work, but I did say at the beginning of this conversation that I made a determination to finish this collection of poems in the middle of feeling like in the middle of crises, and all kinds of crises, personal crises with natural catastrophes everywhere, crises with the pandemic, grief. I don't know anyone who hasn't experienced some loss, not just in this country, obviously, but all over the world. I don't know where you could have been if you didn't have you're not grieving something. And so what I like for people to take away is to know that that they're not alone with it, that I hope, as Azadeh Seyhan said so graciously in the back of the book, there's a advanced praise for it. She's a critic and a scholar, and she said that I offer the consolations of poetry in the face of current crises. It's a long quote, and she nailed it. I've been taken by her use of the word consolations. In Spanish, it's consuelo. It's comfort. Consolations in English, we don't use it that often now. And when I hear it, it kind of falls hard on my ear. I think it almost sounds like honorable mention, like I'm offering something as a substitute, like it's a less than. But constellations of poetry, then as I thought about it, with so much going on, it is a comfort. And so I do hope people are taking away some comfort in knowing that there's someone that took the time to sit down and try to articulate what insomnia has been like at 2 a.m. when the world is still and you're filled with all this anxiety about so much that you can't do anything about, how to articulate that. Or the Black Lives Matter movement. I remember the very moment I first heard of Trayvon Martin. There's a poem for him there. As a mother, I remembered exactly when I was hearing it on the radio for the first time, and I wrote that moment. So I'm hoping that what people can take away is to know that at least there's one other person that has been, focusing on those moments, and that's what poetry is. Someone has asked me if of my work, what would be on the menu? How would you ask guests to dress? That's from Suzi, supposedly Q Smith. Okay, well, Suzi Q Smith, I don't know. I've loved costume parties and balls, and I was part of an organization many years ago in San Francisco, and we asked people to show up as their favorite literary figure in any time in history, and that might be fun. You can't come as yourself; you have to come as somebody else. So we had somebody come as Netzahualcoyotl, for example. And of course there were like 5 Frida Kahlos in there, but she's not a writer. So maybe something like that. I definitely would like to see various moles on the menu. I love different kinds of food, but I am very partial to Mexican food, to my own culture of food. So we'd have to have something like that, and some form of libations and maybe a signature drink for the occasion.
And what would be that signature drink? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, well, we'd have to think about it. We might have to do some testing first to see, once we decide on the theme of the evening. Maybe I would ask people to come in costume of their favorite character in one of my books or poems. That would be fun too. Some good music and no one taking themselves too seriously would certainly also be on the menu, including me.
That is so wonderful. I just wanted to say thank you again so much. It's been such an honor to be able to read your work, to have your work in the world. Thank you for writing. And thank you to Duende. Please purchase a copy through Duende District. Thank you to The Word. Truly, thank you.
I do want to repeat, as was mentioned earlier, that if you do order your book from Duende, I am very happy to be sending out personal signatures, dedications on nameplates that the press has provided. So in these times, we're doing everything that we can. So don't think that, it's too bad I'll wait to get a personal signature later, because we don't know later. We're here in the moment, and I'll be very glad to mail something out.
Thank you all so much for your patience tonight. Again, the link to purchase this book is in the chat from Duende District. Thank you for this beautiful conversation. I'm now envisioning this wonderful party, and I want to know what the signature drink is. So thank you so much to all of our viewers for joining.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. This has been beautiful.
It's been my pleasure. I'm so sorry for all this with the audio, but I hope...
We're happy to have you in any way that we can. You. I hope the next time we do this, it's in person. Ana, thank you. It's been an honor, just an absolute honor.
Well, definitely. Thank you. It's been my honor and pleasure, too.
From one end of New Mexico to the other. Lupita, as always, I love you. And we'll keep having you back as long as you're willing to come.
I'm here to support Duende. So keep going.
Whatever legends you want to talk to, you just let me know. Thank you, Suzi. Thank you to the Word. Thank you to our beautiful community. I thank you for being so patient with us, and sending you guys good night. I hope this was as wonderful for you as it was for us.
Thank you all, and good night.